There was a team of people who worked at black sites or covert sites dealing with UAPs. They first reached out to me in the spring of 2023. But as things went forward, they decided they were going to move out of those legacy, they call them legacy programs, dealing with UFOs, which were illegal projects. And they know they're criminal and illegal projects, and come forward. They went from initially wanting to just release all that information and data, which is what our thinking was until November. And then they decided they would come forward publicly. So the first of them has recently unmasked himself, Jake Barber, and a couple of other guys. They're people who have had hands-on with the crash retrieval of these objects. Now, they're not wanting to release much evidence. They released a few seconds of it, well, hell, one of his colleagues, not his, but Jake Barber's colleagues, picking up an egg-shaped extraterrestrial vehicle out of the desert, which I sent to you. Now, that was one of many retrieval operations. So the teams that do these retrievals are tasked with not only retrieving non-human craft, but when we have a sensitive classified aircraft go down, they also work on retrieving those. So this is a very interesting, it's in the material I gave you. This is from a shot right above the underground opening where man-made UFOs come up out of the ground.
And where's that located at?
This is the Lockheed Skunk Works out in the Edwards Complex Ranch. Now, I've known about these since the early 1990s, before this gentleman and his team were assigned there. That was only about 20 years ago. And he has admitted to some of this publicly already. One is the tracking and targeting of the non-human craft and the interception of them, and then striking them with electromagnetic pulse weapons that bring them down. Sometimes they crash hard, sometimes they're settled down pretty softly, and they're intact. So both occur. I've given you prima facie proof of criminal activity related to this subject. Where is the FBI? Where's the Department of Justice? Where is Congress? And where is the White House? Nowhere. So if you're, let's say that you're in one of these remote areas in the desert and you're using these assets to kind of target non-human craft, and then you have an electromagnetic pulse weapon to knock it and bring it down.
Right.
They put up what's called a TFR, which is it's just a temporary flight restriction area over the operating zone because they're not up all the time. So sometimes there'll be other small, like these small jets back here, in planes that'll stray into that TFR. They just blow them out of the sky. They knock them down. They kill all the passengers. They then incinerate them to dust, powder, and that's it. Even worse, these whistleblowers have said that sometimes that electromagnetic pulse beam goes outside the TFR, and they take out people who are trying to obey that restriction. Now, I'm telling you right now, there are so many horrific crimes being committed. Murder, abductions posing as aliens. It's all illegal. 3 separate people don't know each other that have been comm centers, communication centers, where somehow they have intercepted traffic communications, non-human intelligence craft, where because at the rate at which we have reverse engineered ET technology and now have turned it into weapon systems against them, there's a red line that we're going to cross. And in other words, if we don't fix this problem, there are forces out in space way more powerful than anything, and certainly more powerful than the president. Because I know for a fact that we have crossed that red line, and we are using technologies that are extraordinary against these people. And their long game, which is, I think, about to happen. I'll just say, I'll give you a preview. There's 2 ways this comes out. It comes out truthfully, and it's quite clear that these non-human intelligences and craft are not hostile. If they were hostile with the technologies that they have, we'd be gone. We would have been gone in August of 1945 when we detonated the first atomic bomb. It had been over. However, they have spent a lot of money and time over the last 70 years staging, false alien threats. So let me start ticking these off for you. The abduction syndrome, totally a staged CIA and other corporate event. One of the men that we have who come forward recently was abducted by a Raytheon triangular craft, he and his wife, and suffered terrible injuries back in 2000, 2001. So that is not in dispute. We can prove what I just said. The animal mutilations everyone hears about, those are 100% man. Those are human. They're all portrayed as alien. Then you have the sort of frightening stories of these objects being down in developing world countries, blowing up a whole village. That's us. We've done that. So this is a craft that Mr. Herrera was on a Marine platoon, and this was in 2009 in Indonesia. They were on a humanitarian mission. And he and his 6 guys went off in a direction, came across in the jungle that this object, man-made, staffed with some kind of covert human operators without proper military insignia. And in the crate there, we found out from this new whistleblower, this because he was at that conference at the National Press Club in June of 2023 when Mr. Herrera disclosed this. He was threatened to be killed by all these guys who were there. And then this crate, he thought they were transporting drugs. And then this new whistleblower came up and said, no, those are human assets in there. These are people that have been taken to be trained as a psionic operator. And a psionic operator is someone who, they pump them up full of drugs. Most of them end up dying or end up in a coma. Some of them survive. And they're used to use their, what I was talking about before, consciousness and thought to latch onto the guidance systems of a non-human craft. This is 300 feet across, man-made. When this left, this 300-foot diameter, it left like a spark off a grinding wheel. It went up, it sounded just a little bit like a transformer, over the horizon in a couple seconds. We're not talking hundreds, we're talking hundreds of thousands of miles per hour, no sonic boom. Why? Because they create an electromagnetic field bubble in space-time that they move through. Now that's human. in that paper was a description of the technologies that are non-human, where they interface with very advanced electromagnetic fields for communication with thought. It'd sort of be like what Elon Musk is trying to do with Neuralink, but without the speed of light, where there's a direct interface between the conscious field and thought and a machine. That is how non-human civilizations can communicate across the vastness of space-time, and it's done through a trans-dimensional electronic system. So I knew this in 1973, where you have a technology like the headset you're wearing that would augment your own conscious abilities. And everyone's heard of those CIA remote viewing programs and things like this, where they were using people like Ingo Swann to see with consciousness, like psychic spine, psionic. And a lot of people laugh at that. And I said, no, it's a legit science, and it was done for 30 years at the CIA. Now, the science of consciousness is very controversial, but people like Dr. John at Princeton started the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Group, the Peer Lab, and they were able to prove through using quantum machines, random number generators, that people could just sit and put their awareness on this type of machine, and it would shift the curve of whether it was spitting out zeros or ones. It was just a digital machine, right? Spitting out, it's a random number generator is what it's called. And they were able to prove to a scientific certainty that that's true, that there's field consciousness. Now, we're taught in science, and I'm speaking now as a doctor, that it's all locked in our skull and our brain. But there's something that is beyond that is consciousness. And some people say, oh, it's spirit. Well, you can call it whatever you want. But it's the consciousness field, and it can be scientifically accessed. He had been taken in by a known counterintelligence person named Lou Elizondo, who is someone working to intercept these whistleblowers. And no, Elizondo is a paid disinformation person. And
how convinced are you of that?
100%. I have an email from the top guy at the CIA who was there when Ronald Reagan wanted to know about this when he was running for governor, who was a very young postdoc, and he immediately wrote and said this is what he's doing. Now, recently, Mr. Elizondo has started saying more correct information. Initially, he said, all of these objects out here, we don't know what they are or how they fly. Now he's admitting we have the man-made ones. And I'll tell you, the vast majority of the UFOs people see, they're not from outer space. They're not alien, they're ours. But they have dangerously been used in false flag operations and deceptive operations, or the Pentagon calls it deceptive, indication and warning, or deceptive INW. The pop culture would be false flag, which means you just set up a decoy, you set up a false operation. So that was his primary responsibility when he first emerged, was to gaslight officials, gaslight Congress, and intercept witnesses.
That's a job, right? So
it's a whole counterintelligence, psychological warfare operations out of CIA and other agencies, and that's what they do. And I've known some of these players since the early 90s. One of them that had been involved back in those days was had been head of Special Forces and Army Intelligence named General Albert Stubblebine. And he offered me personally in May of 1992, $2 billion if I would join his team and not do what I've been doing. Correct.
If they have, if a person has enough power to approve a $2 billion bribe, that person also has the same enough power to also eliminate you.
Correct.
So why waste $2 billion?
Well, and those attempts happened after that. But anyway, I don't want to get too much into that part of the person. My personal story is not. It's a tragic story.
So, lower the audio a little bit, Rob. It's very loud. This is first take.
One giant leap. So, I guess you want to do it again. Okay.
So what Neil Armstrong said to a friend of mine, and also I know Buzz Aldrin knows this, his sister has confirmed it to me, but he won't talk about it, is that there were all these UFOs that were in the area of the landing. So they switched to something they had filmed that was then relayed in, because there was a big time relay. Everybody thought they were seeing that in real time. There was enough time to switch in other footage. And they had to, because they were trying to keep the UFO issue secret. So did we go? Yes. Did what happened get disclosed? No. And I have people, I haven't seen it. I have people on my team who've seen the actual footage. A man named Carl Wolf, very credible man. He was at Langley Air Force Base at a National Security Agency relay station. And a piece of equipment broke, and he was brought in to fix it. And it was a compartmented area that he had never been allowed in, but they needed this fix. So he goes in. Two things that stand out in his interview. One, the operating center was almost like a international UN. There were people in there speaking various languages. This was on a U.S. Air Force base, and this is in '68. Now, what were they doing? They were looking at the early digital images from the lunar orbiter. So the lunar orbiter is what went around the moon and was mapping it, right, prior to the landing. In those images, he saw them with his own eyes, and I've heard other accounts, were ancient and modern structures that were already there, sort of in the area between the light and dark, sort of in that area. And he said they were very clear, crystal clear. I've heard this from other people. So what I understand is that when we were going to land, they knew there was a fair chance that if we landed, we may not be alone, and that might be seen by 500 million or 1 billion people, whatever it was, in '69 during the lunar landing. So they had to have.
I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough to not say, Houston, there's a light out there that's following us. So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object.
Well, Neil and Buzz.
Ben Rich, you remember Ben Rich? He was the director, the president of the Lockheed Skunk Works. So the week he died, he had a conversation with a colleague of mine, James Goodall. He called him up. He was very close to death, had cancer. And Ben Rich says to, he asks, well, what do you really have out there in the desert? And Ben Rich says, anything you can imagine, anything you've seen on Star Trek or Star Wars, we have it, we've already done it, it's out there in the desert. He says, but not Area 51. And he was talking about in the underground facilities connected to this. So what that opening is connects to a place called the Ant Hill, which is to the east, out in the desert further, and goes underground through a series of bases. They're known as STIFs, subterranean facilities. Some people call them DUMBs, deep underground military bases. And they're connected with underground tunnels. I will give you the date when we mastered gravity control. It was October 1954, so I wasn't born yet. So in the elite engineering and contracting world, these have been in various stages of development in 40s and 50s, but they mastered, let's call it the gyro. So that, if some of the early UFO film footage you see, it looks like the thing is like a leaf falling. It's because that was a man-made one that wasn't stable, wasn't alien. But once they mastered gravity control, then they became stable. And by the late 1950s, early 60s, they started being used in special projects, illegal special projects, which is why Eisenhower lost control of this whole enterprise. Eisenhower was the one that got deceived, and then ultimately, on his farewell address, Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex. He was talking mostly about this kind of operation that he couldn't talk about publicly. Jack Kennedy was going to get to the bottom of this. He fired Allen Dulles, CIA, one of the founders, and he also subsequently got assassinated. Now, whether the files that President Trump's going to release have this in it, I know. And I have people who in another country have documents to establish this, that Jack Kennedy was killed because he was going after this issue to get it back under control, the UAP issue. So, and I'm pretty certain that Robert Kennedy was killed for the same reason.
You think he was killed for this reason?
Yes, I do. The guy who invented the rocket, Adolf Hitler, on his deathbed said, Carol Rosin, who was his assistant at the time, is one of our whistleblowers, said that this is the reason this is going to be kept secret is at the right time they're going to disclose it, but they're going to try to present an alien threat from outer space to unite the world in sort of this totalitarian power grab, right? Where the whole world, like the movie Independence Day, comes together to fight the horrible aliens. But the only way you can do that is to have a propaganda machine that's been running for decades. That's why I tell people, you Google this subject, I say 90% of what, and people who are skeptical, like your friend here, I go, good for you, you should be skeptical. And here's why. Because I'd say
it's very frustrating, but
yeah, but 90% of everything out here on this subject doesn't add up. It doesn't add up at all. I mean, and that in and of itself diminishes the credibility of the subject. Now, the other problem is when you tell the actual truth about the subject, you discredit yourself. I was warned by a CIA guy in 1991. He said, if you tell the whole story here, the truth, it will discredit you because it's more bizarre than the fiction they're selling to the public. And the long game has always been to blend enough information with disinformation that the disinformation is believable, but then gaslight people that there's some threat out there. I'm going, oh yeah, I'll tell you who the threat is. It's humans. Humans are a threat not only to ourselves, we've become a threat out in space. But just for argument's sake, let's say that everything I'm saying is true. This is all planning to come out this year through the intelligence community and a whole group of whistleblowers with the evidence and the proof. If this is handled wrong, what I've had conversations with people who have coming into the administration, they know that this will be 1,000 times worse than what went bad with COVID. It'll be 1,000 times worse than that.
Why is that?
Because if you get this wrong and it pivots the whole world in a panic, because there's non-human intelligence out there that are presented as a threat, that are abducting people and killing people and doing this, and it gets spun and mutilated into that direction, which has always been this covert group's plan. Then we're going to go into a dystopian tailspin that will be way worse than COVID. So, but if you get it right, you get the golden age. There's all this talk, the golden age. And this is why, if you talk to these guys who are defecting from these black sites, one of their main objectives is exactly what I described, is to start an entity to bring these technologies out, the ones that can be brought out safely, that would be for peaceful use of energy, and also technologies that would assist with healing, health and healing. And those exist. Let those come out, keep the things that fly, classified, which they should be until the world's more stable. But you can't just keep this in a box forever. The other problem is there are elements in Russia and China who have this technology, and if they move this out to the world before us, then we're going to be bringing up the rear. So if people want America to lead in technology, they can't just keep their heads stuck in the ground. This is all going to come out. But you cannot say it was alien. Now, this is important for the public. Everyone, listen carefully. If they start rolling out the false alien invasion stuff, keep this in mind. Is it actually from outer space, or is it from this covert group, which as of this date remains unchecked in its power and unrivaled in the technologies they have, and therefore have both the intent and the ability to hoax, I'll just be blunt, anything they want that would look alien, when it isn't. I'll tell you, my opinion on this has changed a lot over the years. When I first started, I really thought all the alien abductions were alien. And then I had some special operators who said, no, we're doing that. I said, how? I had no idea we had this kind of craft. I didn't know that we had man-made things that looked like a gray alien. I had no idea that there was an intention to create the specter of fear so that someday in the future they could play that card. I think we're at the point of that card being played.